Hi, everyone. Thanks again for joining us to another show of Our Veterans and Their Stories. My name is Shirley, and I'm very happy to have with me Pat and Harold Mann today. And we're going to talk about the history of their family. And it's very fascinating because they go back to the Revolutionary War.
That's right.
So thank you very much for joining us,
Those,
and we
right.
really appreciate it. So let's start off by talking about your background in the Revolutionary War.
All right. We're going to go back in history, and a great 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 grandfather, he fought in the Revolutionary War. Uh, he fought in the Battle of Long Island in 1776, and he was captured by the British. And then they moved him around, and then he was finally exchanged for a prisoner of war. And then he came back and he finished his tour of duty in the service. And as years went by, he put in for a pension. And the reason he did that was his eyesight was failing, and that was because he was a tailor. And so the government issued him a small pension. And then he was 65 years old when he passed away. But it's good to know how our history started. And here's somebody that fought in 1776.
And Harold, how did you find this information? How did you come about that?
This information we're washing across the Delaware in New Jersey, and I asked them on the New Jersey side if they had any information there. And they said no, go over to the Pennsylvania side to their library. And I did. I put in Jacob Richardson, that's who fought in the war, and I put his name in, and the whole report came out for me on the machine. So that's where I got this certified information from Pennsylvania.
And that was from the David Library, in case anybody
Yeah.
wants to
Uh-huh.
research that.
You want to find out about history of someone, even if they were from Pennsylvania and they served. So you can look up records that way.
So he enlisted in 1770.
1776. And then he was taken prisoner November the 16th, 1776. So then they kept him, and then they exchanged him for a prisoner of war.
And it makes you wonder if he knew General Washington.
You don't know. He was from Pennsylvania. Maybe their paths had crossed. You don't know. But these were just regular men, and they wanted the freedom, and they didn't want to be. The problem was when the war started, half of the people were for the British, and the other half were for the United States. So you had a neighbor who was British, and you were for the United States. So there must have been a lot of fighting going on between the people. See, and a lot of these men were volunteers that went to fight.
Right.
So that's one battle and piece of history on my mother's side of the family.
And your mother was the one that had discovered this information, or
Yeah, my mother discovered it, wrote it down. But of course, when you're younger, you never ask any questions about anything. And after they pass away, then you start finding notes and paper, and that's how you piece it together.
It's amazing that
Yeah.
you can find history, and your family was from
Yeah,
the
this is the
Revolutionary
family,
War.
right? And this isn't somebody just saying this. This is actually documented.
It's wonderful. Now you also had a relative in the Civil War, and I'd like to
Yeah.
find out a little bit more about that.
All right. Then we go from that war now. Let's see. We go to the Civil War, and I had a great 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 grandfather who his name was Jacob Brenizer, and he was killed in the Civil War. And I don't have too much information on him. I'll have to try to trace it out and what battle he was in. But I do have a flag here that belonged to him. And if you'll notice, it's an American flag with only 13 stars. And that represented 13 states. And then I have from his wife, the women used to do was make samplers. And this is a sampler she made. And
Let's
this
turn it this way. Go. That way. There we go.
Yeah.
There it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
this is a sampler she made, and it's dated in 1840. So that's going back many years. And this is what the women did in those days, made samplers and used that. But like I say, I have to trace out where he was killed or what battle he was in.
And this information was also your mother's information?
This- This I found, again, this was all notes from my mother, which she wrote out, and put his name down and everything, and that's how I found out about it. Because when you're younger, the adults never talked about it. They never mention it, but when you're younger, and especially the young people out there, try to trace back your family history. There's a lot of history here
Yes.
that you know. So now,
How long ago, excuse me, did you find all this information out?
not too. After my mother passed away, I started going through records, and that's where I found it.
How long ago was that?
She died in the 80s.
The 80s.
My mother, let me give you a little history. My mother was born in Indiana, and then the family moved to Coffeyville, Kansas. And my grandfather then, at that time, he had a bakery in Coffeyville. And then my mother went to the Methodist College and then came east here to New Jersey and was a deaconess for the Methodist Church. And her territory was down Neck, Newark. If anybody knows anything about Newark, down Neck, then she met my father and married and stayed here. So then that's how she came here. So she often talked to me, told me a story. In Coffeyville, Kansas, there was the Dalton gang. Now the Dalton gang was like Jesse James, in that she knew the family, but she knew the one son that stayed straight, but the others got into the holding up everybody. Well, they decided they were going to hold up their bank in town where they lived. Well, I understand from her they held up the bank, they all were shot and killed, and that was the end of them. But she always talked about the Daltons and that. So
Well, it's nice that your mom. At
yeah,
least
she
told
was.
you
My
about
mom
the
was
history.
very active in the Methodist Church, and I often teased her. I think she did more work for the church than the minister in the church. She was involved with everything.
That's wonderful.
So
That's wonderful.
yeah, she was always active in church. And my mother was only a short person. She only come up to here on my shoulder, and she was very short, took quick steps, and it was odd getting a pair of shoes because she was so short. But she went to Kresge's store in downtown Newark, and the salesman there always got her shoes, a 4B shoe.
Wow.
So that was small. So that was life with my mother.
Mom. And now
Wow.
let's talk about your dad, because your
Oh,
dad was in World War One.
yeah, now we go to World War One. I've gone through the wars, and my father, he was from England.
And we have a picture of your dad in here
Yeah,
too.
I'll
So
I'll show you this. just to tell you something, my grandfather, my father's father, came from England. He came by himself. Then he sent for the family, his wife, my father, and 2 sisters. So now World War I broke out, and my father enlisted in the army. And in those days, if you enlisted in the army, you became a citizen. So then, this is a picture of him and his mother in his uniform. If you can see that.
It's a very nice picture.
And from World War I. Now, he went overseas, and he went overseas, and he fought in France. I'll just show this first. Hold.
Okay.
He fought in France, and he.
The picture?
This is his.
The
Here's his picture.
That's the one. Okay, good.
His uniform,
Oh, nice.
and in those days they named the Americans the Doughboy, which was made from the way their uniforms were and that, and
We also looked that up as to what the doughboy meant. And
Right.
the term doughboy, it said, most commonly referred to American infantrymen around World War One. And it said by the time World War II began, they were called GIs. But the evidence of the word doughboy was in use as far back as the mid-19th century around the Mexican border. And I think, Pat, you also mentioned about...
Right, I looked it up, and there's a theory that the Salvation Army, the women from the Salvation Army, went to France and delivered donuts to the soldiers. So they think it might have come from that too.
all right. Now, I'll show this first. I'll just put this here. Now, I'm fortunate to have my father's World War I uniform.
This is amazing.
This is his uniform from World War One.
3 caps on it too. 3 stripes.
Yeah, I don't know what that stands for, but he fought. Let me put this down now. And this, with his uniform, these are like leggings they use to roll around their legs. And that was part of their uniform.
So this, they just
Put it
wrapped it
around
around the
wrapped
leg.
it, yeah. It was like you're putting on a bandage or something in it, but they had to do that.
And I wonder how they held on. I mean,
I
by
don't
pins
know.
or
It's
by...
tied on maybe. But that's the way it looked. It looks like they tied it, see the things
tied
wrapped.
it on.
So they not there. So now he went over, he fought in France. He went he went over the top twice. That's in the trenches. And then he captured a German machine gun nest. And then he was gassed over there, and that's when, in World War I, the Germans used gas. So after that, he was sent back to the States. But first of all, they used to pass out a booklet for the troops to be used for English, French, or German. And then he had a name tag here. He was in Company A. Now, he belonged to the 6th Engineers. Now, the 6th Engineers went overseas to build bridges, but the fighting got so bad that they put all the troops in the battle. So I have here a whole book published about the 6th Engineers, and they followed all the troops, their names and everything, and when they were wounded or that. And my father's name is in here on the when he got gassed over in France. Now, what my father would do, this is a picture of in 1967 when there were still troops from World War One living, and they had a celebration in the country, and these are the troops that belong to the 6th Engineers of that. Now, my father, somehow he learned how to cut hair and become a barber. So he would cut the men's hair, and the troops would come to him, cut my hair, I need a haircut. And that's what he would do. And when they had this reunion, some of them remember their haircuts from him, which is a story. So then, what he would do, he still, when he was living, he still fit into his army uniform. So when a town was having a celebration or during a day of celebrating for the town, he would put the uniform on and be with the Salvation Army. And here's his picture in his uniform helping out the Salvation Army.
That's
So
terrific.
he did that. But my father was very patriotic. I don't know how anybody out there is patriotic today. We always seem to have problems today with the flag and that. But my father, if you played the national anthem on the radio or on television, he would stand up. And people wondered why he was doing that. But he was very patriotic, and as this picture shows. And here, he's a veteran of the U.S. Army, private, served in World War I, fought in France with the 6th Engineers, was gassed, he received the Purple Heart. He passed away March 1st, 1988. He was 92 years old.
Do you have his Purple Heart?
I don't have it. I have to look for it. I could get one through they can reissue me a
Give it
note.
to him.
But
And this
then
is his honorable
this-
discharge.
this
papers.
is his honorable discharge, and to make out some of the battles he was in, one of the Battle of Verdun over in France and some other battles. But he went through it. He got gassed. He came back to the States, but he managed to live through it. What my father did at that time, he got back to the hospital, but he didn't want to stay in the hospital. So he signed himself out. So any of you veterans, don't sign yourself out if you're sick or ill. Because my father, by signing himself out of the hospital, he couldn't collect any pension because of that. Because he released himself from the service. One quick story I must tell. His buddy who went in the service with him never fought overseas, never fired a shot in battle, but he was he liked to drink, so he went in on the base to drink at the base headquarters, and he fell off the stool and he hurt his hip. Well, do you know he managed to collect a pension for the rest of his life? And my father was so mad over that because he had signed himself out. So if any veteran out there, no matter what service you served in, if you have something wrong, be sure it's marked down. So if you have a reoccurrence of it, you have proof of it. So that was the life of my father in the service. So now we gone for 3 wars. And now, of course, World War II came along, and I had a cousin in World War II, and he was stationed in Florida all his time, but he taught men how to fly the B-26 bombers, which we used in battle. So we said, well, World War II's over now, and everything will be settled. Well, along comes the Korean War. So I end up enlisting while the Korean War was on. And then we figured, well, that's over with. And now we have a grandson in the United States Marine Corps
this picture.
in the Air Wing.
There he is.
So here's
And what is his
picture.
name?
Nick.
Nick? And how
Nick.
long is he in now?
He's in
4 years.
4 years he served in the Marine.
He signed up
still
for
there.
5 years.
But he's with the Air Wing. So as you
Flight crew chief.
he's a flight crew chief in the Marine Corps. So you see, family on my side of the family has gone through every generation of war. And it doesn't seem real. We always seem, the United States always seem to be in a battle. And of course, with the Civil War and the Revolutionary War, the Revolutionary War, your history, you had history right here, where you live in the United States, with George Washington and the troops, and that. And in those days, they had to march distances. They didn't all have horses to ride.
That's
I had my father's cousin was in World War One, and he always used to tell me he had to make sure his horse was in top shape because they had to ride the horses, and the horse had to take you.
That's amazing.
It is. It's amazing what you look back at and what men had to go through.
And the fact that they've told you these stories.
Yeah,
you know,
the stories are told. If I didn't have it written, some of them are written down, or like my father, I finally got the story out of him because he didn't want to talk about it, you know. So, and it lasted.
But what's nice is that he passed that on to you. And
Yeah,
that you have
yeah.
And also Pat.
Yeah.
You have a family story too.
Right.
And you have your little box. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your family history?
Yes, I remember growing up in the 50s and my father sitting down at dinner talking about World War One when he was in World War One, and he talked about standing actually right next to Adolf Hitler. And he said he was nobody then. He was only a soldier, and he was standing right next to him.
And you had a little box that you had some artifacts.
Oh,
that you
yes,
had with
yes. And he, different things. All different things, like money from Germany, from the Nazis. And here they are. I still keep them in a little box, and his all his stripes that he had from his uniform, his doughboy uniform, and then when they came home, he lived in Perth Amboy, New Jersey. They were very honored, and they had ceremony after ceremony, and special honorary badges and medals and for serving their country. And the towns, all the little townships, cities, they were very proud and they honored them. And he talked about the victory gardens that everybody had.
Did you also have a
During
picture
the
of
war?
him too, right? That you could show us?
Oh, yes. Yes, I have a beautiful picture of him as a young army soldier from World War One.
That's wonderful.
Original frame and everything. This is how the frames looked, and
Very handsome man.
Yeah,
Very nice.
yes.
Very nice picture.
yeah, he was very proud, and he said that when they were in the front line, he really believed in God for the first time. He said a soldier would be right next to him, would be killed, and slid right down him. And he said, why not me? And he says, I believe there's a book in heaven with your name on it. And when it's your time to go, then you go. If not, you don't go. And he believed that. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to mention too with the wars, when I was talking about the wars, the Vietnam War, which was very unhappy for the veterans. But now the veterans, the Vietnam War, are starting to come out.
Yes.
And I was at Woodbridge School the other day, and the children were all outside, put on a program, and they said, "You want to say anything?" And I told them, I said, "If you know anybody from any war that was in the service and their relatives or cousins or somebody, go up to them and thank them for their service as a veteran." So I hope the children remember this, and maybe some of them remember it. If you're a veteran outside and a child comes up to you and greets you and thanks you for your service, that means a lot to the veterans.
It means a lot.
Yeah.
I would also want to add that I looked this up, and Armistice Day ended World War One, and that was on November 11th.
Right.
That was 1918.
Right.
So that makes it this year the 100th anniversary.
Right.
And in 1954, President Eisenhower had changed the name from Armistice Day to Veterans Day.
Yeah, veterans.
So,
And Veterans Day is coming up this weekend, and then also with the Marine Corps, it's their birthday, which was founded in 1775. So we have a ball. They don't. The Marine Corps don't let you forget the birthday. Fine, that's it.
well, is there anything else that you might want to talk about your families that we didn't go over?
Yeah, well, yeah.
Just
Yeah.
a couple other pictures I see here.
Yeah, this is talking about the service. I had a son that served in the National Guard. I had a son that served in the Marine Corps.
And the Navy?
And the Navy were.
Oh, yes. We got a nephew that's on the USS Truman on the ship,
Served.
serving right now, Marcus.
Marcus, yeah.
Also, my brother, he served in the Army. And my other brother was a Marine, and he served in Cuba in the Bay of the Pigs. Yeah.
So did he have any story that he told you about serving in the Bay of Pigs?
No, he was just proud that he was a Marine and proud to serve.
Yeah.
He didn't come home with any stories.
We're finding out in this day and age, and I found out we have veterans out there who will not talk about their service, but we're trying to get the veterans to talk about the service and have it recorded so future generations can go to a library or Washington, D.C. and get information about the battles they were in.
And that's what we're doing here. And
That's
we
what
wanna
we're doing today.
Go through every veteran that we can come across.
Yeah, good.
too.
Our grandson came over to our house 4 years ago and asked his grandfather, "I'm thinking of joining a service. Which service do you think I should join?" And his grandfather looked at him and smiled. So he has been serving 4 years in the Marines
I
in
might.
Newburgh, New York, right
Yeah.
now. He's a flight crew chief.
When the grandson graduated from Paris Island, we were down there to see the graduation. And that's where I trained from. But I just want to mention, while we were there, I found out through the Brigadier General that the Commandant of the Marine Corps would be there. And that's very unusual. So I said, well, I'll be in dress blues tomorrow at the graduation. And the Brigadier General said, oh, I'll look for you. Well, he found me, and then he said, now look, when the program is over, I'm going to take you over to meet the Commandant and his wife. He's going to take you and your wife over. So we met the Commandant of the Marine Corps, and the first thing he said to me, "Where's your grandson?" So my wife got him, brought him over, and we have a picture of it. And that's Commandant Dunford. And now he's been promoted to Chief of Staff in Washington.
Wow.
So that means a
Wonderful.
lot.
What
So
an
it
honor.
worked out as an honor. And we were the only ones that got to meet him. Nobody else. They picked me up.
He said he
So-
wanted a picture taken of an old Marine and a young Marine.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, when I do the other, I'll show that. When
Thank
I do
you
that.
so much.
So it's been a pleasure. And
Well,
I-
we thank you very
Very
much,
much.
Pat and Harold,
Thank you.
for sharing your family history with us, which is just incredible. And this is actually our part one, because part two, we will be talking to you about your service during the Korean War.
Yeah, it's giving this talk or lecture. Somebody might see it somewhere. It might be a connection somewhere, a family connection.
That's possible. That's very possible.
Like I just did, like where my mother was from Kansas, her sister lived there. Saw her 10 years ago, and she passed away recently. And my son that moved to Kansas, he told me about it. And you can't leave your name. He can't give you anyone in charge at the funeral home because of the law. And then I remembered my aunt had a son. I had his name, and my wife's daughter traced him out. I found him in Colorado.
Wow.
So when I called him, I said, "I haven't seen you since we were kids, when we visited Kansas." He was only a kid.
Wow.
So I traced him out. And the reason I couldn't get his sister, she had passed away. So I found somebody by coincidence, see? So you don't know, by giving this talk today, somebody might pick up on something and looking for
Good to
somebody.
see that.
Even the last name Man. My grandfather came from England, but he never talked to the family about his father, mother, sisters, brothers, nothing. And I didn't think to ask as a kid. So maybe somebody in England or somebody sees this, the name of Man, maybe there's a connection.
We'll find you.
We'll find
We'll
it.
find you.
And I'd like to end saying that I also served my country. I served as a registered nurse at the Veterans Home in Edison for 27 years. And I heard all the stories from the soldiers, but just one in particular I thought was a little funny. A soldier came over to me and he said, "You know, nurse, everyone lost their heart in San Francisco, but not me. I lost my finger." And I said, "How did you do that?" And he says, "Well, I was sent home from the service. I was in a ship and I went underneath the Golden Gate Bridge and my finger got cut off in the rope and off it went and a shark took it."
Oh,
Wow.
no. Oh, no.
But he
Oh,
says,
no.
"I'm okay. I just wanted to tell you that story."
Yeah.
So it always stayed with me.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again
Good
very
man.
much.
Right.
We thank you
Enjoyed
both
it.
for your service.
Aw.
And thank you
Yeah.
for being with
Right.
us. We really, really appreciate it. And thank you all so much for joining us once again for our veterans and their stories. And if there are any other veterans that would like to come forward, we really would appreciate it. And thank you all so much for your service. And we wish you all the best. And God bless America. Thank you.